I want to talk about resurrection. Yes, we're still in Lent. This is the last numbered Sunday of Lent. Next week is Palm Sunday, which is still in Lent, but we have a special name for it. So, Lent is not a time we think of talking about resurrection. We think of, well, this is the time of death, and we need to sit and wallow in topics of death and darkness. And that's true. But the lectionary has given us a little gift, a little foretaste of life, of resurrection, of what is to come. And I want to talk about resurrection, a type of resurrection that happens within seconds, a type that may happen within minutes, or that may happen after 3 days, or may happen after 4 days, or 100 years, maybe 1,000 years. Let's start with the one that might happen after just minutes, and that is a memory that I have being 12 years old. And when I was a kid, my favorite person in the whole world was my grandpa, my mom's dad. And my grandpa and grandma lived in Nebraska and on a ranch, rural Nebraska. We went there twice a year. And my grandpa was a rancher, and he was a sportsman, and he was this big muscle. I mean, he was in his late 60s, but man, he was fit, and he had big, biceps, and I thought he was the coolest. He also could have played professional baseball. He could have played professional football. It's just that's not the direction that his life took, and he ended up being a rancher, which I also thought was very cool. And but he had some heart problems. So each, as I neared the age of 12 or so, each time we went up to Nebraska in the summer, the winter, he would be less and less able to go out and throw the ball with me or whatever, or take me out in the truck where I got to sit on his lap and steer the truck through the ranch, right? It became less and less possible as he got more sick. And then one summer when we went, when I was 12, it was the very first day we arrived. And my dad, my brothers, and my dad took us out to explore the ranch a little bit. We like to kind of walk around and just check things out. And when we came back to the house, something was wrong. And my grandpa had had a heart attack. And we had to rush him to the hospital 10 miles away. And so the whole family was there, and it was pretty soon after that we realized that he was gone. That was hard for me, obviously, as a 12-year-old, losing my favorite person in the world and my grandpa. But what makes me want to tell this story is the memory of how my grandma handled that moment. Because they were people of deep faith, especially my grandma, Pentecostal. Always saw them reading the Bible and praying and going to church. And my grandma was struggling with that moment, as you can imagine. And in her faith, she chose that moment to try to call her husband back to life. And I remember standing there nearby and her praying fervently and even sort of commanding his spirit to return to him in the name of Jesus. And I was very conflicted at that moment, and I'm still conflicted even as I tell the story. Because as a 12-year-old Pentecostal, I was a firm believer in miracles, a firm believer in resurrection. I knew that it did happen and could happen. And I wouldn't say that I've totally changed my mind about that. And yet, I couldn't get over the notion of my grandmother embarrassing herself. That she was asking for something that wasn't going to happen. And I sort of shrank a little bit. I kind of wanted to fall through the floor. This poor woman lost her husband, and she's all wrapped up in this belief that he's going to come right back to life again with this prayer. And it didn't happen. He stayed dead. It was just a few minutes thereafter he had passed that this happened. It didn't work out. And you feel that same kind of desperation in the story of Lazarus. And you see, it's so interesting. We know Mary and Martha are very different people, right? They're sisters, and yet Martha's the industrious one, and Mary is the kind of prayerful, worshipful one. And we see that story elsewhere in the gospel. But here, when they encounter Jesus showing up 4 days late, they say the exact same thing, don't they? They say, Jesus, if only you had been here, our brother would not have died. And that's coming from a real place, because remember what Jesus said when he was told that Lazarus was ill? He said, this illness will not lead to death. He made a promise. And they're trying so hard to believe, yes, we believe you're the Messiah. We believe you are from God. And you just made us this big promise. And now here we are, 4 days later. And that's an important, you notice twice in that gospel, it says that it had been 4 days. Because in that tradition, the spirit sort of hung around the body for 3 days before it departed. That if there was going to be some kind of miracle, that was your window of opportunity, 3 days. And here Jesus arrives on the 4th day. And so we feel the desperation in the sisters, in the family, in those who are there to weep with him. And Jesus himself, he joins in that. And I can never preach this gospel without re-emphasizing Jesus wept. He entered fully into that moment. And just like we don't go to Easter, we don't go to Resurrection Sunday without passing through these 40 days of Lent. Jesus did not go to resurrection without fully entering into death with them. But out of his compassion for his friends, for Mary, for Martha, for the others, and out of his purpose in calling to show the glory of God to people who needed to see it, he took action. And we know the story, and we just heard it. Lazarus was raised from the dead. Nobody consulted him, by the way. He was probably doing fine in heaven, and now all of a sudden he's back, and he's like, wait a second. You let me spend 4 days in paradise, and now I'm back. Well, okay, hi, Mary, hi, Martha. Yeah, I guess this is for the best, but he doesn't. And we look, it's such a fascinating juxtaposition to see the resurrection of Lazarus then read alongside the resurrection of the army, the dead bones, the dry bones in Ezekiel. And these are both stories of death returning to life. But look how different they are. When Ezekiel shows up at this valley of dry bones, no one is weeping. No one is grieving. No one is asking for anything. They're just there. They're just dead. It's probably been 100 years. Death won for 100 years. And now God leads Ezekiel to this place and says, what do you think about this? Maybe you believe that life can return within a minute or two, like my grandma did. Maybe you believe that life can return within 3 days or even 4 days. But what about 100 years? And Ezekiel says, I don't know. You know? What are you asking me for? You know. And God tells him to prophesy over those bones. Notice that God doesn't say, all right, watch this. He says, prophesy. I want you to prophesy. I want you to be part of this. I want your words, your breath, to combine with my breath, to bring life to these bones again. So as Ezekiel obeys, he prophesies, come from the four winds, breathe on these bones. Although that's step 2, but still you get the point. The flesh comes back on the bones, but they're dead until the breath comes, and then the life returns. I want us to think about our own prayers. Sometimes our faith responds in moments of crisis, like my grandma's did. And no, my grandpa didn't come back to life, but we saw her faith in action. We saw her faith sparked by this moment. I noticed that she didn't pray again for his resurrection the next day, or 3 days later, or 10 years later. It was in that moment. Our prayers tend to be galvanized and activated by these moments of crisis, these moments of darkness. And we talked in our class this morning about Job and how his moment of greatest faith declaration of saying, I know that my Redeemer lives, and in the end he will stand upon the earth. And in my flesh I will see God in the end. He doesn't come to this moment of faith declaration until he has hit rock bottom. Till he has come to the very darkest moment in his life and said, I am completely spent, I am exhausted. There's nothing left. And that's where the faith is revealed. Think about our prayers. What is the moment when our faith is actually revealed? I believe that a faith journey, an important part of a faith journey is to notice that moment and then to let it out of its cage. Why do we say things like, well, I guess all we can do now is pray? That means we have taken our faith and we've assigned it to one little corner of our lives and said, well, once we've tried medicine, once we've tried surgery, once we've tried getting a second job, once we've tried talking to that estranged person again, once we've tried everything else, well, then maybe God can step in. We put our faith in a cage. And I want to invite someone from outside the Christian faith to speak into us and to give us and to inspire us to let our own faith out of the cage. Some of us know the name Ram Dass, a mystic, who in his own death experience has said that every exhalation, every breath out is death. And every inhalation, every breath in is resurrection. We breathe out, and in a spiritual sense, we die. And we breathe in, and in a spiritual sense, we are raised to life again. We experience death and resurrection every few seconds. But if we see it the way that Paul sees it, when he writes in Romans, he says, to set a mind that is set on the flesh is death, but is set on the spirit is life. Paul is talking about two different worldviews, two different frames of mind. And if we are set only on the flesh, if we're set on, well, we have to make this work, what I'm doing today, what I'm doing tomorrow, my success, my identity, my reputation, it's all about that, then we are stuck in that cycle of dying and then desperately living again. Dying and desperately living again. But Paul says, I want you to take your mind off of that and put it on the Spirit. And when our mind is reframed, when we are in the Spirit, yes, we do continue to breathe out and breathe in, don't we? When we breathe in life. But now, when we breathe out, we can breathe life into each other. Life in, life out. Resurrection, 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 resurrection. But it's still lit. And as we continue to march through these 40 days, toward Good Friday, toward Resurrection Sunday, we're still thinking about what is dead in our own lives, dead in our own hearts. What is my valley of dry bones? What is my Lazarus? What is the thing that just happened to me that I am still desperate to fix? But also, what is that thing that happened way in the past? What is my valley of dry bones that I gave up on a long time ago? No one is still grieving. No one is still weeping. No one is still begging God for an answer. I gave up. But that valley of dry bones sits in my soul, weighing it down. And sometimes we need each other's help to figure out what that valley of dry bones is. Sometimes we need a therapist's help to figure out what it is. But we all have one. And just like Job, I hope that as we contemplate what is dead and gone, we can remember and have confidence in the ultimate reality that I know that my Redeemer lives. And in the end, he shall stand upon the earth, and I will see God. Not in the abstraction, not in some vague sort of spiritual truism, but every dry bone in my valley will be restored, and I will receive my Redeemer face to face. Amen.